Prince Harry thought he was walking into a friendly chat, but instead he found himself face to face with Greg Gutfeld, one of America's sharpest late-night provocators. What started as polite banter spiraled into one of the most explosive clashes ever caught on camera, and the audience could feel history being made right in front of their eyes. Before we dive into the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think about this fiery showdown. Now, let's get back to the video. The stage was set under the burning lights of Gutfeld studio, where the glossy desk gleamed and the audience clapped with polite restraint. Greg's trademark half-smile lingered as the announcer's booming voice declared, "Please welcome Prince Harry." Out strode Harry, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched with the kind of confidence that teetered between charm and arrogance. The fitted dark suit, timeless and sleek, gave him a Hollywood sheen. But his eyes, piercing and proud, revealed something else. He wasn't here to be questioned. He was here to be admired. Greg rose, extending his hand in a gesture of welcome. But Harry's response was mechanical. Just a brief squeeze, no smile, no warmth. He lowered himself into the guest chair with deliberate slowness, crossing one leg over the other, radiating entitlement. It was the posture of a man who wanted the world to know he still carried the air of royalty, even far from Buckingham Palace. "Harry," Greg began, his tone polite, but edged with curiosity. "Thanks for coming on. I know you've been busy. California life, media projects, new ventures. It's good to have you here." Harry responded with clipped precision, his accent sharp. "Of course, I suppose it's only fair your viewers hear directly from me rather than the nonsense they usually consume." Nervous chuckles rippled through the audience, already sensing tension sparking like electricity in the air. Greg's smirk faltered, but he pressed on, leaning casually against the desk. "Let's start light. How's married life treating you? Plenty of headlines about you and Meghan. People are curious if California's been a good fit." Harry's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but his tone was dismissive, almost condescending. "Married life is fine, Greg. More than fine, actually. But I find it amusing that everyone feels entitled to ask, as if it's anyone's business but ours." The sharpness in his voice cut through the air, leaving the audience murmuring uneasily. Greg raised his brows, keeping his tone measured. "Fair enough, but you've lived a very public life. That curiosity comes with the territory, doesn't it?" Harry's eyes narrowed, his words slicing back. "A territory I never asked for, Greg. Yet people like you have made a living dissecting things you don't understand." A wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd, the first signs that this wouldn't be an ordinary interview. Greg chuckled lightly, disguising the sting, but his gaze sharpened. "All right, then let's pivot. You've often said moving to America gave you freedom. Do you feel the British public ever really understood you?" Harry leaned forward, his posture stiff as stone, his tone biting. "Understood me? They were fed lies, Greg. Decades of a toxic press obsessed with clicks and gossip, painting me as some reckless spare. That's not misunderstanding. That's deliberate character assassination." The audience gasped at the venom in his words, while Greg kept his composure, sensing the storm was only growing. "Strong words," Greg replied evenly, his pen tapping against the desk. "But many in Britain would argue you turned your back on them, that you walked away from royal duty. How do you respond to that criticism?" Harry's laugh was short, cold, and dripping with disdain. "Criticism from people who bow to an institution that trapped them in the first place. It's laughable. They cling to William and Kate like idols, blind to the rot in the system. At least I had the courage to leave." The audience gasped audibly, the room electrified with shock at his blunt dismissal of the future king and queen. Greg's smirk disappeared as his tone hardened. "Since you brought them up, William and Kate are admired by many for embracing responsibility. Do you admire them for that?" Harry's eyes flashed, his response quick and venomous. "Admire them, please. They've done nothing but play perfect for the cameras, nodding and smiling while hiding behind palace walls. You Americans worship them because you don't see the truth. And frankly, I'm tired of pretending they're saints." The words landed like thunder, silencing the audience into stunned disbelief. Greg tapped his cards sharply, his patience thinning. "Interesting perspective," he said carefully. But many would say your life now isn't exactly free of cameras. Netflix, books, interviews. Some argue you've monetized your exit pretty effectively. What would you say to them? Harry leaned back, arms crossing defiantly, his jaw set like stone. I'd say those people don't have the faintest clue what it's like to live under constant siege. I didn't monetize anything. I survived. And if people can't handle the fact that I tell my story, then perhaps they should stop obsessing over me and find a hobby. The mixture of laughter and silence from the audience revealed just how divided the room had become. Greg gave a slight nod, though his eyes were sharper now, gleaming with challenge. "All right, Harry," he said, his voice low but steady. "We'll get into all of that. But you should know I don't shy away from tough questions, and tonight, America wants real answers." Harry's stare burned back like a dare, his words icy. "Then you'd better be ready for real answers, Greg. Not the fairy tales your viewers are used to." The air in the studio turned heavy, the polite atmosphere collapsing into charged silence. Everyone watching knew this was no longer an interview. This was a duel. The applause sign blinked in the corner, but the clapping was hesitant, awkward, almost forced. The audience knew they weren't watching a friendly late-night chat anymore. They were watching a battle unfold in real time. Greg leaned forward, elbows resting on his desk, his eyes locked on Harry like a predator waiting for the perfect strike. "Harry," he began slowly, "you've said leaving Britain was about freedom, about protecting your family. And yet, since moving here, you've done Netflix specials, a multi-million-dollar book deal, podcasts, endless interviews. Did you leave duty behind or just swap one spotlight for another?" Harry smirked, shaking his head with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Greg, I left because I refused to be suffocated. You call it spotlight. I call it survival. And if I speak now, it's because my voice was taken from me for years. I've earned the right to tell my story." His words echoed with defiance, but they also dripped with bitterness, leaving the audience whispering nervously. Greg raised a brow, his voice calm, but laced with steel. "Fair point, but isn't it fair to say you've told that story many times already? Oprah, Netflix, Anderson Cooper, book tours. Some critics say you've built an entire brand around victimhood." Harry's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as his eyes blazed. "Critics are people with nothing better to do than tear down those who are actually living life. My wife and I are not victims. We're survivors. And if people are tired of hearing my story, then they can stop listening. It's really that simple." The audience stirred uneasily, half gasping, half clapping at the audacity. Greg's thin smile returned, sensing Harry's agitation rising. "Let's talk about Meghan, then. Your marriage is constantly in the headlines. Rumors, speculation, whispers of tension. How do you respond to those who say California isn't the fairy tale you promised?" Harry's eyes narrowed, his tone dripping with irritation. "Greg, let me make this very simple. My marriage is none of your business. None of their business either." He gestured toward the crowd. "We are happy. Happier than most couples you'll find in this country. Frankly, it's insulting that I even have to answer to gossip." The words landed like a slap, and the tension in the studio tightened even more. Greg didn't flinch, his tone measured, but firm. "I only ask because you've been very public about your marriage. You've spoken about private struggles, written about arguments in your book, sat down with Oprah to share personal details. Isn't it fair that people ask questions once? You've put those stories out there." Harry's smirk returned, but it was laced with venom this time. "Fair? Greg, the press has never played fair, and neither have people like you. You thrive on my personal life because without me, you'd have nothing to talk about. Admit it, my name keeps shows like this alive." Gasps tore through the audience as the arrogance rolled off his tongue. Greg's smirk faltered for the first time, but only for a split second. He leaned back and chuckled dryly. "You give yourself a lot of credit, Harry. I assure you this show would be just fine without you." Harry scoffed with open disdain. "Would it? Or would you be back to cheap jokes and second-rate commentary? Let's be honest, Greg. This is the most relevant your program has been in years." The studio grew hotter with every word, even the cameraman shifting in discomfort as Harry leaned back smugly in his chair. Greg inhaled slowly, choosing his words with precision, his smirk gone. All right, let's shift gears. You've spoken about the royal family, about being trapped, unsupported. Some might argue you abandoned not just the institution, but your grandmother, your father, and your brother. Do you regret the way you left things? Harry's eyes flashed with defiance, his voice cutting like a blade. Regret. The only regret I have is not leaving sooner. My grandmother loved me, but she was bound by the system. My father and brother chose duty over family. That's their prison, not mine. I escaped, and I don't envy them one bit. Gasps rippled again, the audience buzzing with disbelief at his harsh words. Greg sat up straighter now, his smirk gone, his voice sharp and steady. You don't envy them. That's interesting because many see William and Kate as the model of dignity and stability. While you've made headlines for trashing your family, exposing private conversations, and turning centuries of tradition into your personal grievance tour. Harry's head snapped toward him, his tone icy, dripping with venom. William and Kate live in a cage. A gilded cage, sure, but a cage nonetheless. They smile, they wave, they pretend. Americans eat it up, but it's an act. You call that dignity? I call it acting. At least I'm honest. The audience reacted with hushed gasps, caught between shock and awe at his relentless attack. Greg's pen tapped sharply against his desk, not playful this time, but deliberate and firm. He leaned in, his voice steady, but biting. Honest. You call this honesty? Cashing in on secrets, selling interviews, pointing fingers. This isn't honesty, Harry. It's opportunism. And I think a lot of people are starting to wonder if you've confused rebellion with relevance. Harry stiffened, his voice low and hard. You can call it whatever you like, Greg, but I know who I am. I don't need approval from the British public, the American public, or late-night talk show hosts to validate my choices. I left a corrupt system behind. And if people can't handle that, it's their problem, not mine. The silence in the studio was suffocating. The tension unbearable, like a storm building with no escape. Greg exhaled, folding his arms, his eyes never leaving Harry's. All right, Harry, he said quietly, each word deliberate. We'll see just how honest you really are. The dual lines were drawn. Harry sat smugly, daring the world to challenge him. Greg sat calm but seething, waiting for the perfect strike. And everyone in that studio knew the storm was about to explode. The studio fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the stage lights. Harry leaned back with folded arms, wearing the smug look of a man who believed he'd already won. Greg, however, leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his stare sharp like a scalpel, ready to cut through royal armor. Harry, Greg began, his tone low but dangerous. If the monarchy was so oppressive, why do you keep talking about it? Why build your entire career around the very thing you claim you've escaped? Harry let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head with disdain. Because it matters, Greg. It matters to expose the hypocrisy, to show the world what goes on behind palace walls. If my words make people uncomfortable, that's their problem. At least I'm not hiding. Greg tilted his head, his smirk creeping back. Not hiding. That's rich. You left Britain demanding privacy, but then signed a Netflix deal, wrote a tell-all memoir, and turned your life into a commodity. That's not privacy, Harry. That's publicity with a price tag. The audience erupted in gasps in a sharp ooh that cut through the tension. Harry's jaw tightened, his cheeks flushing red. You think you're clever, don't you? He shot back, his voice rising. You sit there in your cheap suit, smirking, pretending you know what it's like to live under global scrutiny. You have no idea. Greg didn't blink. Cheap suit. At least I bought mine myself. Can you say the same about everything you've worn in your life? Without the Windsor name, you're just another guy in California with too much time on his hands. The studio gasped louder. This was the first time Harry's composure cracked, his confidence visibly shaken. That's absurd, Harry snapped, pointing at Greg. I've built something of my own. I've created a life outside that family. Greg leaned back calmly, his voice slicing through the room. No, Harry, you've monetized your family. Every dollar you've made since leaving came from your title, your drama, your grievances. Strip that away, And what's left? A man living in someone else's mansion giving interviews about how unfair life has been. Harry's voice rose in fury, his finger trembling as he jabbed the air. You don't know me. You don't know the pain, the betrayal I've endured. Greg cut him off like a blade. What pain? You and Megan turned your marriage into a brand. You call William and Kate trapped, but the truth is you envy them. They don't need to sell secrets to stay relevant. You do. That was it. Harry snapped. His chair screeched across the floor as he bolted upright, his face crimson with rage. How dare you? You don't know me. You don't know my family. You don't know the hell I've lived through. His voice cracked, fury giving way to raw desperation. Greg rose too, eye to eye, his voice sharp as steel. And yet William and Kate faced the same palace, the same press, the same scrutiny, and they endured without burning it all down. That's the difference, Harry. They grew up. You didn't. The audience gasped. Some clapping, some shouting. The studio erupting in chaos. Harry ripped off his microphone and slammed it onto the chair. This is beneath me. You're beneath me. I won't be part of this circus another second. His footsteps thundered off stage, his back rigid as the cameras caught every second of his storming exit. For a moment, silence reigned. Then all eyes turned to Greg. He straightened his jacket, smirk returning with calm precision, and looked directly into the camera. Well, Greg said dryly, there you have it. A man who wanted privacy, storming off live television. A man who speaks of honesty but refuses real questions. A man who left the monarchy but can't seem to leave it behind. The crowd erupted, applause, cheers, and disbelief. Greg leaned in for the final blow, his voice steady and damning. Here's the truth. Titles don't make character. Palaces don't make integrity. And running away doesn't make you free. It just makes you lost. Prince Harry came for sympathy. Tonight, he left with accountability. The camera zoomed in, the lights dimmed, and the audience roared as if witnessing history. Social media exploded within minutes. Clips went viral. Headlines screamed Prince Harry meltdown. And Greg Gutfeld sat calmly at his desk, the man who dismantled a prince on live TV. What did you think of this explosive showdown? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next big story.